But we turn now to the case of Chelsea Manning, a whistleblower who served her time for leaking classified information, but finds herself back in jail for refusing to testify about Julian Assange to a secret grand jury. Joining us from New Mexico is Nancy Hollander, Manning's lead attorney and an internationally recognized criminal defense lawyer. She joined the firm of Friedman, Boyd, and Hollander in 1980 and became a partner in 1983. She's also an associate tenant at London's Doughty Street Chambers, which specializes in criminal law, international law, and human rights. Mrs. Hollander has been admitted to practice in the U.S. Supreme Court, 9 U.S. Courts of Appeal, 7 U.S. District Courts, U.S. Army Court of Criminal Appeals, Southern Tribal Court, and New Mexico. She's also on the list of counsel for the International Criminal Court, or ICC, as well as the U.S. Defense Department's pool of qualified civilian defense counsel for military commissions. She joined us live from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Nancy, thank you for joining us and welcome to CN Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I wanted to ask right off the bat is, what is the current status of the fines against Chelsea Manning, the jail term, or being held in contempt in that situation? How long is this going to continue at this time?
Well, let me make clear, I was Chelsea's lawyer for her clemency and her appeal. I don't directly represent her on the grand jury case, but she and her lawyer in that case have asked me to respond to press inquiries. I don't know how long she'll be there. The grand jury is for 18 months. The first grand jury, she got in toward the end of the time it was sitting and they had to start over. This one is started at the beginning, so it could go the whole 18 months. Theoretically, it could go as long as she refuses to testify. In other words, she can get out just like she did before, had a new subpoena, go back and start over. At some point, the judge has to realize that this has become a punitive measure and that she's never going to testify, and she'll probably at that point be released. This has happened in the past. It's not a new thing. I've not been aware of cases where people have been charged these extraordinary high fines. They may exist. I haven't done that research, but I've not been aware of that. It's another attempt by the court to get her to testify. The other issue for me, and I don't know where they are on this in the pleadings. I know there hasn't been a hearing on the pleadings, and their lawyer has filed some pleadings regarding this. But before Julian Assange was charged with espionage, they wanted Chelsea to testify about whatever she knew that would aid them in getting that indictment. They now have that indictment. They can't use her grand jury testimony, in other words, to shore up an indictment they already have. So my question is, what else could she possibly know? And as a lawyer who's represented her in her appeal, which is over now, I'm concerned that this is a perjury trap. They're trying to catch her in something she said before. And I also believe that the government, this administration, does not approve of the clemency and is perhaps trying to find a way to get her back in jail to serve more of her time. So that's where it stands. She's in a facility in Virginia, in a women's facility, and the U.S. Marshals are in charge of her care there.
Well, that goes to the exact question that many of us have had on our minds, which is exactly what you discussed, the fact that this grand jury is ongoing despite the fact that Assange has already been indicted and had the formal extradition request has already been filed by the United States. I think many people are wondering why this grand jury exists at this point. But can you speak to how Chelsea's holding up in these conditions? Are you aware of her situation at this time?
Well, I think she's doing okay. Certainly better than she did previously. She's in a women's facility, which helps. As far as I know, she's holding up okay. But, prison is prison, and it's stressful. And as she sees these fines mounting up. It has to be stressful for her because she doesn't have the money to pay any of this. I don't know why the government seems to think she has a lot of money, and it's simply not true.
Do you think, do you feel that if Assange is extradited to the United States, that this grand jury will, will just disintegrate? Do you think that it'll continue? Do you think that Chelsea will remain in prison regardless? Or do you have any other insight on what might happen if Assange is extradited?
Well, the first thing is that I don't think Assange is going to be extradited for a long, long time. It's possible that the new PM in England and the UK will try to speed that process up, but it's generally a very long process, and we're talking years here. So the two almost become unrelated in my mind. I can't imagine that they have any reason to keep Chelsea in prison until he gets here, because they're not asking her to testify at his trial. So I don't know what else they want from her.
Nancy, you've spoken about the idea that the indictment has come down already, and why would they keep her? Is the grand jury still sitting? And do you know, in the doctrine of specialty, the U.S. was supposed to tell Great Britain by a certain date last June exactly what the charges would be, and that was it, in order for British courts to decide whether they could extradite Assange just for those crimes. But that can be waived, I understand, in the British-U.S. extradition treaty, that doctrine of specialty, which would allow the U.S. to add more charges. Do you think that that's what's going on here?
Well, it's certainly possible. The doctrine of specialty or speciality has been waived before. As I understand, the treaty with Great Britain really is in the U.S. favor, and the U.S. may be considering more charges. I don't know, but I can't imagine what they would be. And yes, the grand jury is still sitting, because Chelsea will be in jail unless something happens. She'll be in jail until it ends. And it started, and it's for 18 months. So, it does all kinds of other things. It's not sitting just for Chelsea Manning.
So there are other witnesses going before that grand jury, as far as you know?
There may be, but there are a lot of other cases that it handles. The grand jury
I see.
looks at all the other people who the government wants to charge in that district. They all, in federal cases, all go to the grand jury.
So it's quite possible they're not talking about Assange at all, but they're dealing with other cases, and that's enough to keep her in prison. Now,
they're very likely talking about other cases, and they don't meet every day. I don't know how often they meet, but when they meet, they deal with other cases that the U.S. attorney brings. So we have no way of knowing, because, of course, that's right. And one of the reasons that people need to understand something that I think is very important: Chelsea Manning's decision to not speak has to do with her belief that the grand jury shouldn't exist, that they're a holdover from the old English law. They're completely secret. She doesn't get a defense lawyer in with her, or any lawyer. And that's why she's not testifying. It's not to protect Julian Assange.
Right. I totally understand. I was going to ask you about that. There was some concern that the government may be trying to get her to testify and use some of that in some way in a possible trial with Assange. Now, I don't believe that that's legal. They can't use something in a grand jury. Isn't that right? In the trial, do you think that that might be up their sleeve? And would they, in your view, want to subpoena Chelsea to appear at a trial, if there even is a jury trial? Because we may have Leonie Brinkman, the judge here, decide there would be. It would be a closed court because of state secrets, privilege, whatnot. But just if you can talk to that issue of the evidence being used in a trial, or her being called to the trial to testify.
Well, you've raised several issues.
Right.
Even if Judge Brinkman, let's do it backwards first. Even if Judge Brinkman closes the courtroom because there are national security issues and state secrets, that doesn't mean there's no jury.
Right.
There are often juries. And those two things are unrelated.
Right.
Do they want her to testify at a trial? They may. They may subpoena her to a trial whenever it happens. But under the law, as I understand it, they can't use her testimony at the grand jury to shore up their existing indictment. They can use it as evidence to get probable cause, to get an indictment. They have the indictment now. They are not supposed to add more charges to it. That can be waived. We don't know what their plans are. At this point, on the British side, they are going through the extradition proceedings. She has very fine extradition lawyers. The lawyers I know and know well. They're very good, and they will protect Julian from extradition for as long as they can.
Now, we invited you a couple of weeks ago, before we saw you appear on the Four Corners show on ABC in Australia. And in that interview, you said that Chelsea had acted completely on her own and wasn't encouraged by Julian Assange. But I want to ask you whether that even matters, because Assange, even the indictment says this, that he was not helping her to get access to classified information that she didn't already have access to. She had clearance to everything. The indictment lays it out very clearly. He was trying to help her hide her identity, which any investigative journalist absolutely does, for a source. So is that even an issue, whether he encouraged her to give more information, something that reporters do all the time as well?
Well, I don't think it's an issue, because he is a journalist, but that whether he's a journalist or not is an issue the government will fight, as we know that they will. There are some in that government who don't consider Julian Assange and WikiLeaks to be journalism. This came up in the Mueller examination yesterday. And, but yes, he did what journalists do. Having a secret dead drop is, I mean, the New York Times has one. The Washington Post has one. You can anonymously drop stuff for them. Unfortunately, they didn't take Chelsea's information until after WikiLeaks took it. And let's remember then who did publish it: the New York Times, the Guardian, and Der Spiegel. They published all of it. They may not have published everything, but they published great quantities of this information. They just didn't publish it first.
So they also had unauthorized possession of classified information, which is what Assange is being charged with, Section E of the Espionage Act, which no journalist has ever been charged under before, though there have been attempts by even FDR and Nixon. It never happened till the Trump administration. Why isn't the New York Times indicted then?
Well, good question. There was an attempt more recently that failed several years ago, about 10 years ago. But yes, journalists are in possession of unauthorized, classified, restricted data all the time. And the government often leaks information that it wants out to journalists.
Of course.
This happens all the time. So it's a very, very serious issue for journalism in the United States that Julian Assange is indicted. We can't underestimate the danger to journalism and to a free press and to the right of people to know that this affects, because the bottom line here is the right of people to know what their government is doing. And it's a simple way to put it. The government knows more about us than we know about them. When that happens, we don't have a free press. We don't really have a democracy, because we don't have any idea what's going on. And that's what's at issue here, in my view.
Completely. Totally agree with you. I want to ask you about that first indictment that's kind of forgotten now, the one that was superseded by the second, and that was the so-called hacking, although that word never appears in the indictment, only in the press release of the Department of Justice. But it says in there was a online chat between Chelsea Manning and someone named Nathaniel Frank. That was the code name, and the assumption is that was Julian Assange. Are you certain that was Julian Assange, that Chelsea spoke to Julian in that conversation? Does the government have to prove that?
That's not something that I feel very comfortable talking about.
Okay.
But I don't know.
That's fine. So you brought up one last question here. You brought up the idea that, and I was going to ask you this, but you already mentioned that there are maybe people in this administration, in the justice branch, judicial branch, who were not happy with the sentence being commuted by Obama and want her to serve more time, which would be a really underhanded, obvious thing to do. I'm just curious, why do you think Obama commuted Chelsea's sentence?
Well, it's a funny thing. When we talked about commutation, when I talked about it with Chelsea, we decided to file, even though she didn't meet any of the requirements normally. Normally you have to be out of prison, you have to be off probation, etc. And we read the president's pardon requirements. We read the Department of the Navy, the Army's qualifications. She didn't meet any of them. And we decided to do it anyway. And at the time, I remember telling her, don't count on this, but let's do it. We have no reason not to do it. Her supporters really wanted us to do it, and we did it. And do I know exactly why he did it? No. Do I think that he was concerned about the new administration? Yes, I do. And the other thing is, as Obama said, Chelsea served 7 years, way more than any other whistleblower. The other whistleblowers, and Obama, in the Obama administration, I believe there were 8, but they served a year and a half. Nobody served 7 years. And he felt that that was enough. That's what I believe. Now, I know that there were people in the Justice Department, people in the Army that were not pleased with this, even then. And those people are still there. And this administration, we were worried, in fact, until the moment I got her out. I went to the prison 120 days later and went in to get her out. And we were so afraid at that point that we wanted to make sure she was out. We all were wearing flak jackets. We were afraid that someone was going to try to kill her. It was in Kansas. Kansas is an open carry state. Until we got her out of that prison, out of Kansas, onto a jet, and off to a safe house, we were worried that something would happen, that either Trump would do something or someone else would do something.
That's a really chilling story. Nancy, what about her? Sorry?
If you've seen the documentary XY Chelsea, it's all in there, and I recommend that people see it.
Is she able to?
Go ahead.
No, I'm saying, was she able to have visitors now where she is? Does she have access to the internet?
Well, nobody in prison has access to the internet except the federal prisoners who can just talk to their family, but they don't really have access to the internet. They can't go searching. Yes, she does. Certainly her lawyers visit her. I'm sure that they're not the kind of restrictions that there were when she was under the control of the Department of the Army. But it's up to the U.S. Marshals who gets in, who sees her when, and how that works.
Right. Well, thank you, Nancy Hollander, for joining us from Albuquerque, New Mexico, to talk about her client, Chelsea Manning.
Thank you, and thanks for the work you're doing. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.